On July 14, 1958, the Iraqi Free Officers, led by Brigadier General Abd al-Karim Qasim, overthrew the Hashemite monarchy headed by King Faisal II. The Iraqi Free Officers had modeled themselves after the Egyptian Free Officers movement, which had overthrown the Egyptian monarchy in 1952. In planning the coup, the officers had initially feared retribution by the Baghdad Pact, which was basically a British-led Middle Eastern NATO. However, after the coup, the organization just rebranded as Iraq left the organization in 1959. The major Iraqi political factions were the Pan-Arab nationalists who wanted to join the United Arab Republic of Egypt and Syria but had issues with it. These were the Nasserists and the Baathists, who had their own problems with one another. On the other side were the Iraqists, who wanted to focus on improving Iraq itself and their Iraqi identity. These were the Qasimists and the Iraqi Communists, or ICP. The 1959 Mosul uprising saw the Baathists, Pan-Arab nationalists, who were supported by the United Arab Republic, and other groups attempt a coup against the Qasim regime. The uprising was caused by Qasim's increased ties to the ICP despite himself not being a communist. Additionally, the Pan-Arab nationalists were angry at Qasim's Iraqist approach. They were supported by Nasser and the UAR as skirmishes broke out between the communists and the nationalists. After clashes between the ICP and local Nasserists resulted in the burning down of a Nasserist restaurant, Colonel Shawaf phoned Baghdad and asked for permission to use soldiers under his command to keep order. Shawaf was given an ambiguous response by Baghdad, so he decided to try and carry out a coup on March 7th. This coup would fail and Shawaf would be killed, and as a result, both the ICP and Baathists increased in power and strength. So, mass polarization occurred in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was recruited to assassinate Qasim in October of 1959 by Pan-Arab nationalists who were mad that Qasim was still aligned with the ICP, so they planned an ambush. During this ambush, Saddam was only supposed to provide cover, but instead he began prematurely shooting, which disorganized the whole operation. Qasim's chauffeur was killed and Qasim was hit in the arm and shoulder. The assassins thought that they had killed Qasim and quickly retreated to their headquarters, but Qasim survived this assassination attempt and would remain in power until the Ramadan Revolution. The First Iraqi-Kurdish War then began in 1961. When Qasim overthrew and executed the monarchy, he had wanted the Arabs and Kurds to come together as Iraqis under his Qasimist and Iraqist agenda. However, most of the Kurds were in favor of Kurdish separatism and were led to believe that Qasim would accept Kurdish autonomy if they supported him, which they had done in the Mosul uprising. But in 1960, it became apparent that Qasim had no intention of following through with the promise of Kurdish autonomy. In June 1961, the KDP issued an ultimatum to Qasim outlining Kurdish grievances and demanded autonomy. Qasim ignored the Kurdish demands and planned for war. It was not until September 10th, when the Iraqi army column was ambushed by a group of Kurds, that the Kurdish revolt truly began against Iraq. In response to this attack, Qasim lashed out in an over-response by ordering the Iraqi Air Force to indiscriminately bomb Kurdish villages, which ultimately rallied the entire Kurdish population around Mustafa Barzani's KDP movement. So, the First Iraqi-Kurdish War broke out on September 11th, 1961. Just as a disclaimer, this video is not about the First Iraqi-Kurdish War, but rather its effects on Iraq. The First Iraqi-Kurdish War would have to be a video on its own. The Ramadan Revolution, also known as the February Coup, occurred in February of 1963 and saw the execution of Qasim by the Ba'ath Party and its National Guard militia. Qasim's former deputy, Abdul Salam Arif, who was not a Ba'athist, was given a largely ceremonial title of president, with the prominent Ba'athist general Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr named as Prime Minister of Iraq. However, Secretary General of the Ba'ath Party Ali Saleh al-Sa'id used his control of the National Guard militia to establish himself as the de facto leader of Iraq and had more authority in reality than al-Bakr or Arif. In the 9-month rule of al-Sa'id, and his civilian branch of the Ba'ath Party was effectively a reign of terror, as the National Guard detained, tortured, and executed thousands of suspected Qasim loyalists. Furthermore, the National Guard increased to 34,000 members by August of 1963. The Ramadan Revolution saw a counter-coup in July by the ICP and elements of the Iraqi army, which failed in the Ar-Rashid revolt. However, the Ramadan Revolution also inspired the 1963 Syrian coup by the Syrian Baathists and Nasserists in March of 1963. although the Syrian Baathists purged the nationalists a month later in April. The Syrian Nasrists unsuccessfully attempted a counter-coup in July of that same year. Just as a side note, the Iraqi and Syrian forms of Baathism are not the same and completely hate each other. Anyway, back to what's going on in Iraq. Another coup occurred in November 1963 and saw Abdul Salam Arif disarm and purge the National Guard units that had committed violent actions against the civilian population, as well as a purge of the Baath Party. The coup was bloodless, but resulted in the deaths of 250 people as the Nasrists within the government overthrew all of the Baathist leadership. It lasted from November 15th to the 18th, where Iraqi President Salam Arif, his brother Brigadier General Abdul Rahman Arif, and their Iraqi army supporters suppressed the Baathist National Guard militia, which was very well received by the Iraqis. In the fall of 1964, the Baathists attempted to depose Arif, but failed with their plot after it was unveiled. Arif had the conspirators, including Saddam Hussein, arrested. With all of this internal regime change occurring, Iraq was still embroiled in the Iraqi-Kurdish war. After a failed Iraqi offensive, Arif declared a ceasefire in February of 1964, which provoked a split among the Kurdish urban radicals on the one side, and on the other side the Peshmerga forces, who were led by Barzani. Barzani agreed to the ceasefire and fired the radicals from the party. Arif was later killed in a plane crash on April 13, 1966, and was succeeded as president by his brother, Abdul Rahman Arif. Following this event, Rahman Arif renewed tensions and launched a last-ditch effort to defeat the Kurds. The Iraqi government under Abdul Rahman Arif had been marked as being indecisive and slacked, but it was not corrupt. He also attempted to rekindle relations with the United States in 1966 and in 1967. Arif Abdul Razak, who was not related to the Arif brothers but was another pro-Nasser Air Force commander, attempted a coup on Abdul Rahman Arif and lightly bombed the presidential palace with Soviet MiG-17 jets. But this coup failed and he was arrested. Arif then pardoned Razak, and you know what? That's just an absolute bro move. Like, how many presidents can you attempt a coup against and they just completely pardon you? Abdul Rahman Arif's campaign against the Kurds failed in May of 1966 when Barzani's forces thoroughly defeated the Iraqi army at the Battle of Mount Handran, which is seen as the climax of Iraq's final large-scale campaign against the Kurds during the First Iraqi-Kurdish War. Now, during this battle, the Kurds destroyed 2 entire Iraqi brigades with the aid of Iranian, Israeli, and alleged American advisors. Recognizing the futility of continuing this campaign, Rahman Arif announced a 12-point peace program in June of 1966, which was not implemented due to the overthrow of his government in 1968 by a Baathist party coup. The July 17th revolution was a bloodless coup where the Baath Party and Abdul Rahman Arif's own assistants overthrew him in a bloodless coup. This coup was partially caused by Arif's friendly gestures to the United States, but was mostly due to his attempt to have been a neutral arbitrator before the start of the Six-Day War, and because Arif couldn't balance the internal radical and moderate political factions. It's also worth noting that the Syrian Baathists did not recognize the Iraqi Baathist coup because, the two brands hate each other. The end of the First Iraqi-Kurdish War came in March of 1970 with the Iraqi-Kurdish Autonomy Agreement of 1970 as the war ended in a stalemate. However, both sides knew that this agreement wouldn't last as the Second Iraqi-Kurdish War erupted in 1974. But the Second Iraqi-Kurdish War, like the first one, would have to be its own video. Despite lots of human rights atrocities of the Baathist state, the 1970s is widely regarded as the Iraqi Golden Age, as it was a period of political and economic stability when compared to the previous decade of mass violent political conflict and essentially a losing war against the Kurds. Additionally, this decade was followed by a decade of war between Iran and Iraq from 1980 to 1988 in the Iran-Iraq War. The Second Iraqi-Kurdish War was also only 1 year long and lasted from 1974 to 1975 and saw an Iraqi victory compared to the previous war, which had lasted for almost 9 years and ended in a stalemate. The Iraqis defeated the Kurds as the Kurdish military had attempted to wage a symmetrical war against Iraq instead of using guerrilla warfare tactics like they had done in the previous war. The PUK would also conduct a low-level insurgency from 1975 to 1979 and was a long-term Iraqi strategic victory. Did you know about Iraq's decade of political chaos before this video? Are there other areas that I should have emphasized more on? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.